The distant wail of a coyote echoed through the moonlit valley as Hannah Kerrigan clutched her feverish son to her chest, desperation etched across her face. The small homestead sat isolated against the backdrop of Nevada's Ruby Mountains, miles from anything resembling civilization in the spring of 1873. Her child's burning forehead and labored breathing told her everything she needed to know time was running out. "Hush now, William," she whispered, dabbing his forehead with a damp cloth as the 6-year-old boy whimpered in his fitful sleep. Hannah glanced toward the window, searching the darkness for any sign of help. "Doctor." Abernathy had promised to come from Elko 2 days ago, but like so many promises made to a widow in these harsh territories, it had proven empty. The howling wind rattled the shutters of the modest cabin she had struggled to maintain since her husband's death 3 winters past. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the rough-hewn walls that had once felt like a sanctuary, but now seemed like a prison as her son fought for every breath. A sudden pounding at the door startled her. Hannah reached for the rifle propped against the bedpost, her finger hovering near the trigger as she called out. "Who's there?" "Griffin Yates, madam," came the reply, the voice deep and weathered like the Nevada landscape itself. "Was passing through when the storm hit. Saw your light. Might I trouble you for shelter till it passes?" Hannah hesitated, weighing her options. William moaned in his sleep, his small body racked by another coughing fit. With trembling fingers, she unlatched the door, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the driving rain. Griffin Yates stepped into the light, removing his sodden hat with calloused hands. Water dripped from his long duster onto the wooden floor as he nodded respectfully. His face, partially obscured by several days' worth of stubble, bore the marks of a man who'd seen his share of hardship, but his eyes, a startling shade of blue, held something Hannah hadn't seen in a long time: kindness. "You're welcome to dry yourself by the fire, Mr. Yates," Hannah said, quickly returning to her son's bedside. "But I must warn you, my boy is ill." The cowboy's expression shifted as he noticed the child, his brow furrowing with concern. "How long's he been this way?" "3 days now." "The fever won't break," Hannah replied, her voice catching. "The doctor from Elko was supposed to come, but—" Griffin approached cautiously, hanging his drenched coat near the fire. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward William. Hannah nodded, watching as the stranger placed a gentle hand on her son's forehead, his touch surprisingly tender for such work-hardened hands. "My ma was a healer of sorts," Griffin explained, examining the boy's flushed cheeks and listening to his ragged breathing. "Taught me a thing or two before she passed. Seems like lung fever to me. Can you help him?" Hannah asked, not bothering to hide the desperation in her voice. Griffin met her gaze, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. "I'll do everything I can, madam. You have my word." As the night deepened, Griffin helped Hannah prepare a poultice of mustard and herbs from his saddlebag, explaining that he always carried medicinal supplies on his journeys. They worked side by side, the stranger's calm competence a stark contrast to Hannah's frantic worry. "Been on your own long?" Griffin asked as he helped position the poultice on William's chest. 3 years, Hannah replied, tucking the blanket around her son. "My husband, Thomas, was killed in a mining accident. We'd only been in Nevada 6 months. Griffin nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's a hard country for anyone, let alone a woman alone." "We manage," Hannah said with quiet dignity. "The homestead provides enough, and I sell eggs and milk in Elko when we need supplies." As the night wore on, William's breathing grew more labored. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rolled across the valley. Hannah felt panic rising in her chest as her son's fever climbed higher. "He's getting worse," she whispered, her hands trembling as she replaced the cloth on his forehead. Griffin's face was grim as he checked the boy's pulse. "We need to cool him down. Do you have a washtub?" Hannah nodded, pointing to the corner where a large copper tub hung on the wall. Griffin quickly filled it with water from the rain barrel outside, adding cooler water from the well pump. Together, they gently lowered William into the lukewarm bath, the child too weak to protest. "Hold him steady," Griffin instructed, supporting the boy's head while Hannah cradled his small body. "We need to bring the fever down or it'll burn him from the inside out." Hour after hour they worked in tandem, refreshing the water and monitoring William's temperature. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally calling for his father in his delirium. Each time, Hannah's heart broke anew, and she noticed Griffin's jaw tighten with shared pain. Near dawn, as the storm finally began to abate, William's fever still raged. Hannah, exhausted beyond measure, felt tears streaming down her face as she wrung out another cloth. "He's all I have," she whispered, more to herself than to Griffin. "I can't lose him too." Griffin, who had been mixing another remedy from his supplies, moved to her side. With gentle fingers, he tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me, Hannah," he said, using her name for the first time. "I won't let go. Not of you, not of him. We're going to see this through together." His words, spoken with such certainty, steadied her. Hannah found herself drawing strength from this stranger who had appeared like an answered prayer on her doorstep. As the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, William's fever finally broke. His breathing eased and color slowly returned to his pale cheeks. Hannah sobbed with relief, collapsing against Griffin's shoulder as the tension of the night released its grip on her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "Thank you for staying." Griffin's hand came up to awkwardly pat her back, unused to such contact but unwilling to pull away. Anyone would have done the same, but Hannah knew better. In this rugged country where survival often depended on looking after oneself first, what Griffin had done was far from ordinary. As morning fully dawned, William opened his eyes, clear and lucid for the first time in days. "Mama," he called weakly. Hannah rushed to his side, smoothing back his damp hair. "I'm here, darling. You're going to be just fine now." The boy's gaze shifted to Griffin, who stood awkwardly by the hearth. "Who's that man?" "That's Mr. Yates," Hannah explained, her voice warm. "He helped make you better." William studied the tall cowboy with solemn eyes. "Are you a doctor?" Griffin chuckled, the sound surprisingly warm in the small cabin. "No, son, just a drifter who knows a few things about fevers." "Will you stay for breakfast?" William asked, with the directness only children possess. "Mama makes the best biscuits in Nevada." Hannah felt a blush rise to her cheeks as Griffin's gaze met hers, a question in his eyes. "You're welcome to join us, Mr. Yates," she offered. "It's the least I can do to thank you." Griffin hesitated, as if weighing some internal decision. "I should probably be moving on." "Got business in Ruby Valley." "Please?" William's small voice seemed to sway him. "Well, I suppose I could stay for breakfast," Griffin conceded, the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. As Hannah busied herself preparing the meal, she was acutely aware of Griffin's presence. He moved about the cabin with quiet efficiency, stoking the fire and helping William sit up against his pillows. There was something oddly familiar about having him there, as if he somehow belonged in this space that had felt so empty for so long. Over breakfast, William peppered Griffin with questions about his travels, his horse, and whether he'd ever fought Indians or outlaws. Griffin answered patiently, toning down his experiences for the boy's ears but keeping him enthralled nonetheless. "How long have you been riding these parts?" Hannah asked as she poured him a second cup of coffee. Griffin's expression grew distant. Most of my life. Joined up with the Union Army when I was 17, fought till Appomattox. After that, didn't much feel like settling down. The open country suited me better. And family. Hannah ventured, immediately regretting the personal question when she saw his face cloud over. Lost them in the war. Pa and brothers fought for the Confederacy. His tone made it clear that was all he cared to say on the matter. After breakfast, Griffin insisted on chopping wood to replenish what they'd used during the night. Hannah watched from the window as his powerful strokes split each log with precision, the morning sun glinting off his dark hair. William, still weak but improving by the hour, tugged at her sleeve. "I like him, Mama. He reminds me of Pa." Hannah smoothed her son's hair, considering his words. There was something about Griffin that reminded her of Thomas, not in looks or mannerisms, but in a certain steadfastness that seemed to anchor the very air around him. By midday, Griffin had his horse saddled and was preparing to leave. Hannah and William stood on the porch to see him off, the boy leaning against his mother's side. "I can't thank you enough," Hannah said, shielding her eyes from the sun as she looked up at him. "If you hadn't come along when you did." Griffin adjusted his hat, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Just happened to be in the right place. He reached into his saddlebag and handed her a small pouch. "These herbs should help keep his lungs clear. Steep them in hot water and have him drink it twice a day." Their fingers brushed as she accepted the gift, and Hannah felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. From Griffin's startled expression, he'd felt it too. "Safe travels, Mr. Yates," she said softly. Griffin nodded, his eyes lingering on her face as if memorizing its features. "Madam." He tipped his hat to William. "You mind your mother, young man, and stay out of that creek until you're fully mended." William grinned. "Yes, sir." With a final nod, Griffin turned his horse and rode away, his figure growing smaller against the vast landscape of sagebrush and distant mountains. Hannah stood watching long after he disappeared from view, an unfamiliar ache settling in her chest. Life on the homestead returned to its familiar rhythm in the days that followed. William regained his strength, soon running about with his usual energy. Hannah threw herself into her work tending the garden, caring for their few animals, and mending clothes by lamplight after William had gone to bed. But something had changed. The cabin that had once felt sufficient now seemed oddly empty, as if Griffin's brief presence had illuminated a void she hadn't fully acknowledged before. At night, she found herself remembering the quiet confidence in his voice when he'd promised not to let go, and the gentle strength in his hands as they worked together to save her son. A week after Griffin's departure, Hannah hitched the wagon for their monthly trip into Elko for supplies. William, bouncing with excitement at the prospect of seeing other people, chattered endlessly as they made the journey. The small frontier town was bustling with activity when they arrived. Miners, ranchers, and travelers filled the dusty streets, and the general store was crowded with customers. Hannah kept William close as they navigated the throng, her list of necessities clutched tightly in her hand. As she examined a bolt of fabric, a familiar voice behind her made her heart skip a beat. "Wouldn't have taken you for a calico woman, Mrs. Kerrigan, had you pegged for gingham." Hannah turned to find Griffin Yates standing there, his usual trail-worn attire replaced by a clean shirt and vest. He looked different in the daylight, younger somehow, the severity of his features softened by the hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Mr. Yates," she managed, absurdly conscious of her simple dress and wind-blown hair. "What brings you to Elko? I thought you were headed to Ruby Valley." "Finished my business there quicker than expected," he replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "Thought I might check on that boy of yours." How is the young man?" "William," Hannah called, and her son appeared from behind a barrel of pickles, his face lighting up at the sight of Griffin. "Mr. Yates," William exclaimed, rushing forward. "Did you fight any outlaws? Did you bring your horse? Can I see your gun?" Griffin chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Slow down there, partner. No outlaws this time, and my horse is at the livery. As for the gun, that's not something for public display." As William launched into a detailed account of his recovery and subsequent adventures, Hannah noticed the shopkeeper's wife watching their interaction with undisguised interest. News traveled fast in small communities, and Hannah could already imagine the speculation that would follow. When William paused for breath, Griffin turned back to Hannah. "I was hoping I might escort you folks home if you've no objection. These roads can be dangerous for a woman and child alone." Hannah hesitated, torn between practical caution and the undeniable pull she felt toward this man. "That's kind of you, but we've managed on our own for some time now." Something flickered in Griffin's eyes, disappointment perhaps. "Of course, just thought I'd offer." William tugged at her sleeve. "Please, Mama, Mr. Yates could stay for supper. I could show him my fort by the creek." Hannah found herself outnumbered. "Well, if you're sure it's no trouble." Griffin's smile was immediate and transformative, erasing the weathered lines around his eyes. "No trouble at all, madam." They completed their shopping together, Griffin insisting on carrying the heavier supplies to the wagon. Hannah couldn't help but notice how naturally they fell into step with one another, or how William slipped his small hand into Griffin's calloused one as they crossed the muddy street. The journey back to the homestead was filled with easy conversation. Griffin shared stories of his travels through the territories, carefully edited for William's ears but fascinating nonetheless. Hannah found herself laughing more than she had in years, the sound almost foreign to her own ears. As they approached the homestead, the setting sun bathed the modest cabin in golden light. Hannah saw it anew through Griffin's eyes, the sagging porch that needed mending, the faded curtains visible through the windows, the small corral where her 2 milk cows grazed peacefully. "It's not much," she said quietly as they pulled up to the hitching post, "but it's ours." Griffin surveyed the property with appreciative eyes. "You've done well, Mrs. Kerrigan. Many men couldn't have managed half as much on their own." His simple acknowledgement of her efforts touched Hannah deeply. Thomas had been a good husband, but like most men of his generation, he'd never quite understood the constant labor that went into maintaining a home. While Hannah prepared supper, Griffin helped William with his evening chores, showing him more efficient ways to gather eggs and milk the cows. Through the window, Hannah watched them work together, her heart constricting at the sight of her son's adoring gaze fixed on the tall cowboy. Over a simple meal of rabbit stew and biscuits, William regaled them with plans for expanding his fort by the creek, complete with elaborate defenses against imaginary raiders. "Sounds like you've got it all figured out," Griffin said seriously. "Though you might want to consider a lookout post on that oak tree. Always good to see trouble coming." William's eyes widened at this suggestion. "Could you help me build it? Before you leave," the question hung in the air, pregnant with implications. Griffin glanced at Hannah, silently deferring to her authority. "Mr. Yates likely has other places to be, William," she said gently, trying to ignore the pang of disappointment the words evoked. Griffin cleared his throat. "Actually, I've been thinking of settling down for a spell. These bones aren't getting any younger, and winter in the mountains isn't as appealing as it once was." Hannah felt her pulse quicken. "There's not much work around here unless you're looking to mine or ranch." "Funny you should mention ranching," Griffin replied, his tone casual but his eyes intent on her face. "I've saved enough over the years to buy a small spread. Saw one for sale about 3 miles west of here. Good water, decent grazing. William bounced in his seat. That's Mr. Peterson's old place. He left after his wife died. It's got a big barn and everything. Is that so? Griffin smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. Sounds promising. After William had been tucked into bed, Hannah and Griffin sat on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The night was quiet save for the distant hooting of an owl and the gentle creaking of Hannah's rocking chair. "You're really thinking of staying?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Griffin nodded, his profile strong against the night sky. "Been roaming since the war ended. Told myself it was freedom, but lately—" He paused, searching for words. "Lately it started to feel more like running." "From what?" Hannah asked softly. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. "From putting down roots. From caring too much about people who might leave or be taken, like my family was." Hannah understood that fear all too well. It's a risk, certainly. Loving people. Griffin turned to look at her then, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Worth it, though, or so I'm starting to believe." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Hannah found herself hyper-aware of his proximity, of the gentle rise and fall of his chest as he breathed, of the faint scent of leather and pine that seemed to accompany him. "William's taken quite a shine to you," she said finally, steering toward safer ground. Griffin smiled. "He's a fine boy. You've raised him well, especially under the circumstances." "He needs a man in his life," Hannah admitted. "Someone to teach him things I can't." "Like building lookout posts in trees?" Griffin asked, his tone lightening. Hannah laughed. "Among other things." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable quiet, filled with potential rather than awkwardness. When Griffin finally rose to leave, promising to return the next day to help William with his fort, Hannah found herself reluctant to see him go. "Thank you," she said as he mounted his horse. "Not just for tonight, but for everything." Griffin's eyes held hers in the darkness. "No need for thanks between friends, Hannah." It was the first time he'd used her given name outside the crisis of William's illness, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a pleasant shiver through her. True to his word, Griffin returned the following day, and the next after that. He helped with repairs around the homestead that Hannah had been putting off, fixing the sagging porch, reinforcing the chicken coop, mending the corral fence. Each evening he stayed for supper, and afterward he and Hannah would sit on the porch, talking long after William had gone to bed. Griffin shared stories of his travels, the grandeur of the Rockies, the endless horizons of the plains, the bustling cities of the East. Hannah spoke of her childhood in Pennsylvania, of meeting Thomas at a church social, of their decision to seek fortune in the West. "You regret coming?" Griffin asked one evening as they watched heat lightning play across the distant mountains. Hannah considered the question carefully. "Not exactly. I regret losing Thomas, of course, but this land." She gestured toward the shadowy outlines of the hills and valleys spread before them. "It gets into your blood somehow. I can't imagine living anywhere else now." Griffin nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's how it was for me after the war. Tried going back east, but it felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit anymore." A week after his first return, Griffin brought news that he'd purchased the Peterson place. William could barely contain his excitement, rushing through his chores so he could accompany Griffin to explore his new property. "You don't mind if I take him along?" Griffin asked Hannah, aware of how precious her time with her son was. "He'd never forgive me if I said no," Hannah replied with a smile. "Besides, it does him good to spend time with you." The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to Hannah's life. Griffin divided his time between establishing his small ranch and helping at her homestead. Word spread quickly through the scattered community about the handsome cowboy who had taken up residence at the old Peterson place and his frequent visits to the widow Kerrigan. Hannah first became aware of the gossip during her next trip to Elko. Mrs. Pendleton at the general store was unusually effusive, inquiring about that fine Mr. Yates with barely concealed curiosity. The banker's wife stopped her outside the post office, ostensibly to ask after William's health, but clearly fishing for information about her relationship with Griffin. "People will talk," Hannah told Griffin that evening as they shelled peas on the porch. "It's the nature of small communities." Griffin's hand stilled momentarily. "Does it bother you, what they're saying?" Hannah considered the question. 3 years of widowhood had taught her the value of self-sufficiency and the danger of caring too much about others' opinions. "Not particularly, though I imagine they're making more of our friendship than exists." She immediately regretted the words when she saw something close off in Griffin's expression. He resumed shelling peas, his movements more mechanical than before. "Griffin," she said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. "I didn't mean—" "No need to explain," he interrupted, his tone carefully neutral. "We're neighbors helping each other out, nothing more complicated than that." But it was complicated, and they both knew it. The air between them had been charged with unspoken feelings for weeks. Hannah found herself watching for his arrival each day, her heart quickening at the sight of him riding over the ridge. She took more care with her appearance, sometimes catching herself smoothing her hair or pinching color into her cheeks before he came into view. William, with a child's perception, had already incorporated Griffin into his vision of their future. "When Mr. Yates lives with us," he'd say, "or after Mr. Yates teaches me to rope." Hannah gently corrected these assumptions without directly contradicting them, uncertain herself of where their path was leading. As summer progressed, Griffin's ranch began to take shape. He purchased a small herd of cattle and 2 additional horses, repaired the dilapidated buildings, and planted a modest vegetable garden. Hannah and William often rode over to help, bringing picnic lunches and staying until dusk painted the sky in spectacular hues of orange and purple. On one such evening in late August, as William explored the barn loft, Griffin led Hannah to a ridge overlooking his property. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land, turning the sagebrush to silver and the distant mountains to gold. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing toward the ranch spread below them. "Will it do?" Hannah took in the neat buildings, the grazing cattle, the small stream winding through the property. "It's wonderful, Griffin. You've accomplished so much in such a short time." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I had motivation. For the first time in years, I had something to work toward instead of just drifting." Hannah felt her breath catch at the intensity in his eyes. "And what was that?" Griffin took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "A future. Possibly a shared one if I'm not being too presumptuous." Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs as Griffin gently took her hands in his. His calloused fingers were warm and strong, enveloping hers completely. "I know it hasn't been long," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "And I know you've built a life for yourself and William that doesn't necessarily need anyone else. But these past weeks—" He paused, searching for words. "Hannah, I haven't felt this alive since before the war. You and that boy of yours have reminded me what it means to have a home." Tears pricked at Hannah's eyes, but she blinked them away, unwilling to miss a moment of the sincerity etched across Griffin's face. "I don't have much to offer," he went on. "Just this land, these hands, and a heart that's yours if you want it." Hannah's throat tightened with emotion. 3 years of independence had taught her that she could survive on her own, but Griffin wasn't offering to rescue her, he was offering to walk beside her. "Griffin," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mama, Mr. Yates." William's excited shout interrupted as he ran toward them, waving something above his head. "Look what I found in the loft." Griffin released Hannah's hands as William reached them, proudly displaying an old spyglass he'd discovered among the previous owner's abandoned possessions. "Well now, that's quite a find," Griffin said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Perfect for that lookout post we've been building." As William expounded on all the uses for his new treasure, Hannah caught Griffin's gaze over the boy's head. There was a question in his eyes, and though their moment had been interrupted, she gave him a small nod that promised they would continue their conversation soon. The opportunity came several days later. A late summer thunderstorm had rolled in, preventing Griffin from working his ranch. He arrived at Hannah's homestead mid-morning, soaked to the skin but grinning as William pulled him inside. "Thought you might need help battening down before the worst hits," he explained, shaking water from his hat. "Saw a couple of your fence posts looking shaky." They spent the day securing the property against the storm, reinforcing the chicken coop, moving the livestock to sheltered areas, and harvesting what they could from the garden before the heavy rain destroyed the more delicate plants. By evening, the storm had intensified, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling around the eaves of the cabin. William, exhausted from the day's activities, fell asleep early, leaving Hannah and Griffin alone by the fire. "Too dangerous to head back tonight," Hannah said, handing Griffin a cup of coffee. "You're welcome to the spare room." Griffin accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. "Appreciate that. Wouldn't want to worry you by trying to navigate in this weather." A comfortable silence settled between them as they listened to the storm rage outside. Hannah felt an odd sense of contentment, knowing that her son slept peacefully in the next room while she and Griffin kept vigil against the elements. "About what I was saying the other day," Griffin began, setting his cup aside. Before we were interrupted, Hannah's heart skipped a beat. "Yes." Griffin moved to sit beside her on the small sofa, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I meant every word, Hannah. I know your independence matters to you, and I'd never want to diminish that. But I think—" He paused, gathering his courage. "I think we could build something good together, something stronger than what either of us could create alone." Hannah studied his face in the firelight, noting the vulnerability behind his usual stoic expression. This man, who had faced war and wilderness, was laying his heart bare before her with a courage that humbled her. "When Thomas died," she said slowly, "I thought that part of my life was over. I focused everything on William and survival. I didn't allow myself to imagine loving someone again." Griffin nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And now," Hannah took a deep breath, "now I find myself looking forward to your visits more than anything else. I catch myself wondering what you'd think about the simplest things: a sunset, a new bread recipe, something funny William said." She reached out hesitantly, placing her hand over his. "You came into our lives when we needed you most, and somehow you've become essential to our happiness." Griffin's fingers intertwined with hers, his grip firm but gentle. "Is that a yes, Hannah Kerrigan? Will you consider a future with a broken-down cowboy who's finally found a reason to stop wandering?" In answer, Hannah leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative with the newness of discovery. But as Griffin's arms encircled her, drawing her closer, it deepened into something more profound: a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, both breathing a little faster, Griffin rested his forehead against hers. "I take it that's a yes." Hannah laughed softly, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "Yes, Griffin Yates, that's most definitely a yes." The storm continued through the night, but within the cabin's walls, a different kind of energy hummed. They talked for hours, planning and dreaming together how they might combine their properties, the improvements they could make, the life they could build for William and perhaps, someday, other children. As dawn approached and the storm finally began to abate, Griffin reluctantly rose to check on the animals. At the door, he turned back to Hannah, his expression serious. "I want to do this properly," he said. "Will you and William ride into Elko with me tomorrow? I'd like to speak to the minister about publishing the banns." Hannah felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the formality of his request. "You're certain? It's not too soon." Griffin's smile was tender as he took her hand. "Hannah, I've spent 15 years wandering without purpose. Now that I've found where I belong, I don't see any reason to wait." William's reaction to their news at breakfast was everything they could have hoped for. His initial wide-eyed shock gave way to jubilant excitement as he bombarded them with questions about where they would live, whether Griffin's horses would come too, and if he could be the one to tell their neighbors. "So you'll be my pa now?" he asked Griffin, his small face serious despite his excitement. Griffin knelt to meet the boy at eye level. "If you'll have me, yes. I'd be honored to be your pa, William, but I want you to know that I'd never try to replace your real father. He'll always be part of who you are." William considered this solemnly before throwing his arms around Griffin's neck. "I think my real pa would be glad it's you," he declared with a child's simple certainty. The trip to Elko the following day took on the air of a celebration. Hannah wore her best dress, a deep blue calico that brought out the auburn highlights in her hair, while William insisted on wearing the small bolo tie that had belonged to his father. Griffin, too, had made an effort, arriving in a clean shirt with his hair neatly trimmed and his customary stubble shaved away to reveal a strong jawline. The small frontier town seemed to buzz with their news even before they'd spoken to anyone. Mrs. Pendleton spotted them entering the general store together and immediately sent her youngest boy running to fetch the minister. Reverend Thomas, a kindly man who had conducted Thomas Kerrigan's funeral service 3 years prior, greeted them with genuine pleasure. "Mrs. Kerrigan, Mr. Yates." "Young William, what brings you all to town on this fine day?" Griffin stepped forward, his hat in his hands. "We've come to discuss having the banns published, Reverend. Mrs. Kerrigan has agreed to become my wife." The minister's smile was warm as he looked between them. "Well now, that's the best news I've heard in a month of Sundays. Come into my office and we'll arrange everything." The formalities were quickly settled. The banns would be read for the next 3 Sundays, with the wedding to follow on the 4th Saturday in September. As they left the church, Hannah noticed several townspeople watching them with undisguised interest. "Word travels fast," she murmured to Griffin as they walked toward the general store. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Let them talk. We've nothing to hide." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparation. Hannah, with the help of several neighboring women, sewed a new dress of cream-colored muslin with lace trim that Mrs. Pendleton insisted on ordering specially from San Francisco. Griffin and William worked together to build an addition to Hannah's cabin, which they had decided would be their primary home, with Griffin's ranch serving as their livelihood. On the morning of their wedding day, Hannah stood at her bedroom window, watching as wagons and riders appeared on the horizon. Though they had planned a simple ceremony, it seemed that half the county had decided to attend. The isolated life of frontier settlers made any celebration a welcome diversion. A knock at the door preceded the entrance of Eliza Johnson, her closest neighbor and friend. "Are you ready, dear? Everyone's arriving." Hannah smoothed her dress with trembling hands. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Is William dressed?" Eliza laughed. "Been ready since dawn, poor child. He's been showing every guest his new pocket watch, Griffin's gift to him. The mention of Griffin brought a smile to Hannah's face. His thoughtfulness toward William never ceased to touch her heart. The pocket watch had been inscribed with both their initials WK and GY, binding them together as father and son before any legal ceremony. And Griffin? Hannah couldn't help asking. Have you seen him? Eliza's eyes twinkled with understanding, pacing the front yard like a caged mountain lion. Never seen a man so eager to be married or so terrified of something going wrong. The ceremony itself was a simple affair, conducted on the front porch of Hannah's now their home. Reverend Thomas spoke of new beginnings and the blessings of family, but Hannah barely registered his words. Her attention was fixed on Griffin, standing tall and solemn before her in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving her face. When the time came to speak their vows, Griffin's deep voice rang out clear and unwavering. I, Griffin James Yates, take thee, Hannah Marie Kerrigan, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Hannah's own voice trembled slightly as she repeated the ancient promises, but her heart was steady and sure. As Griffin slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, another special order from San Francisco, she felt as though her life had finally come full circle, from loss back to love. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Thomas declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Griffin's kiss was gentle but firm, a public declaration of private commitment that brought cheers from their assembled friends and neighbors. William, standing proudly beside them as ring-bearer, beamed up at his new parents with unrestrained joy. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by every family in attendance: roasted venison and rabbit, fresh baked breads, pies made from late summer fruits, and a wedding cake that Mrs. Pendleton had spent 2 days preparing. Someone produced a fiddle, another a harmonica, and soon the yard was filled with music and dancing. Hannah found herself passed from partner to partner as tradition demanded, but her eyes continually sought out Griffin, who seemed equally unable to look away from her for long. When they finally came together for a dance, his arm around her waist felt like coming home. Happy Mrs. Yates, he murmured, the new name sending a thrill through her. Completely, she replied, leaning into his embrace. And you? Griffin's answer was in his eyes, shining with a contentment that transformed his weather-beaten face into something approaching youthful. I never imagined finding this kind of happiness, Hannah. Not after everything. As the evening wore on, William finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep on a blanket beneath one of the oak trees. Griffin carried him inside to bed, Hannah following to tuck him in. Good night, son, Griffin whispered, pressing a kiss to the boy's forehead. Night, Pa, William mumbled sleepily, the word coming naturally to his lips. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at the exchange. In the soft lamplight, they looked so right together, her son and the man who had stepped into their lives and changed everything. When they returned to their guests, Hannah noticed that the celebration had taken on a more raucous tone, fueled by the whiskey that several of the miners had contributed. Griffin, sensing her fatigue, skillfully began to usher people toward their wagons and horses. The bride needs her rest, he announced, his arm protectively around Hannah's waist. And I've got cattle that won't wait for a lazy rancher in the morning. Amid good-natured jokes and final congratulations, their friends departed, leaving the newlyweds standing alone in the yard beneath a canopy of stars. Well, wife, Griffin said, his voice low and intimate, shall we retire? Hannah felt a blush rise to her cheeks despite herself. "I believe we shall, husband." Later, as they lay together in the darkness of what was now their shared bedroom, Hannah traced the outline of Griffin's profile with gentle fingers. "What are you thinking?" he asked, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "That I'm grateful," she replied honestly. "Grateful that you happened to be riding past during that storm. Grateful that you stayed when William was ill. Grateful for second chances." Griffin pulled her closer, his arms strong and secure around her. "I'm the grateful one, Hannah. You and William gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever, a sense of belonging." As they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's warmth, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperation of that stormy night when William's life hung in the balance, to this peaceful beginning of their life together, it seemed both miraculous and somehow inevitable. Life settled into a new rhythm in the months that followed. Griffin divided his time between his growing herd of cattle and helping William learn the skills of ranching and farming. Hannah found that marriage to Griffin brought not only companionship, but also a lightening of the constant burden she had carried since Thomas's death. For the first time in years, she was not solely responsible for every decision, every crisis, every moment of their survival. Winter came early that year, blanketing the landscape in pristine white and confining them largely to the warmth of their expanded cabin. They spent the long evenings reading aloud from Griffin's small collection of books, teaching William to play checkers and planning improvements for the spring. It was during one such evening, as Christmas approached, that Hannah shared her news with Griffin. William had gone to bed and they sat close together before the fire, Griffin's arm around her shoulders as she leaned against his chest. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "Something wonderful." Griffin looked down at her, curiosity in his eyes. "What is it, love?" Hannah took his hand and placed it gently over her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby. Come summer, William will have a little brother or sister." For a moment, Griffin seemed frozen, his expression one of complete shock. Then, to Hannah's surprise, tears filled his eyes. "A baby," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Our baby." He gathered her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of the most precious porcelain. "Hannah, I never thought. After losing my family in the war, I never dared hope for this." Hannah reached up to brush away a tear that had escaped down his weathered cheek. "You said once that you wouldn't let go of me or William. Now there's one more person for you to hold on to." Griffin's smile was radiant as he placed both hands reverently on her abdomen. "I won't let go. Not ever. I promise you that." They told William on Christmas morning, after he had opened his gifts, a new jacket sewn by Hannah and a hand-carved set of toy horses from Griffin. The boy's reaction was everything they had hoped for, his face lighting up with excitement at the prospect of becoming a big brother. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" he demanded, full of questions as always. "We won't know until summer," Hannah explained, smiling at his enthusiasm. "Would you prefer one or the other?" William considered this seriously. "A brother would be good for fishing and riding, but a sister—" He glanced at Griffin. "Pa says it's a man's job to protect women folk. I could teach her things and keep her safe." Griffin ruffled the boy's hair, pride evident in his eyes. "That you could, son. That you could." The news of Hannah's pregnancy spread quickly through their small community, bringing visitors bearing gifts and advice. The winter months passed in a blur of preparation, Griffin adding another bedroom to the cabin, Hannah sewing tiny garments in the evenings, William alternating between impatience for his siblings' arrival and concern about sharing his parents' attention. Spring brought new life to the ranch as well. Griffin's cattle began calving. The garden burst into growth, and construction started on a larger barn to accommodate their expanding livestock. Hannah watched with pride as her husband and son worked side by side, Griffin's patient instruction and William's eager learning creating a bond that grew stronger each day. As summer approached and Hannah's condition became more pronounced, Griffin grew increasingly protective. He hired a young cowhand to help with the ranching duties so he could spend more time at home, and he insisted that Hannah rest more and work less, a suggestion she accepted with mixed feelings. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she reminded him one evening as he took the mending basket from her hands. Griffin's smile was sheepish. "I know, love, but I can't help worrying. You and William and this little one, you're everything to me." How could she argue with such tender concern? Hannah allowed herself to be pampered, recognizing the love behind his overprotectiveness. When her time came in early July, Griffin sent William to stay with the Johnsons and rode for the midwife in Elko. Mrs. Patterson, a sturdy woman who had delivered most of the children in the county over the past 20 years, arrived with her bag of supplies and an air of calm competence that immediately put Hannah at ease. The labor was long but uncomplicated. Throughout the ordeal, Griffin refused to leave Hannah's side, despite Mrs. Patterson's initial objections that the birthing room was no place for a man. "I promised I wouldn't let go," he told the midwife firmly. "I intend to keep that promise." Through the pain and exhaustion, Hannah drew strength from Griffin's steady presence, his hand gripping hers, his voice murmuring encouragement in her ear. When dawn broke on the second day of her labor, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to both parents' eyes. "She has your hair," Griffin whispered in awe as the midwife placed the tiny, red-faced infant in Hannah's arms. The baby's head was indeed covered in fine auburn fuzz, a stark contrast to her fair skin. "And your stubbornness," Hannah replied with an exhausted smile, "making us wait so long to meet her." They named her Grace Elizabeth Yates Grace for the blessing she represented in their lives, Elizabeth for Griffin's mother who had died during the war. When William was brought home to meet his sister, his initial uncertainty quickly gave way to fierce protective pride. "She's awful small," he observed, peering cautiously at the swaddled bundle in Hannah's arms. "But pretty, I guess, for a girl." "She'll grow," Griffin assured him, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, "and she'll need her big brother to look out for her." William nodded solemnly, accepting this responsibility with all the gravity of his 8 years. "I will, I promise." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. Grace grew into a spirited, curious child with her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. 2 years after her birth, the family welcomed another addition, James Thomas Yates, a sturdy boy with a calm disposition who became the perfect complement to his more adventurous siblings. Griffin's ranch prospered, expanding to include not just cattle but also horses, which he bred and trained with remarkable skill. Hannah's garden became renowned throughout the county, producing not only food for their family, but also medicinal herbs that she prepared according to the remedies Griffin had once used to save William's life. William, growing tall and strong under Griffin's guidance, developed into a thoughtful young man with a natural affinity for ranching and a protective devotion to his younger siblings. At 16, he began taking on more responsibility, accompanying Griffin on cattle drives and representing the family at livestock auctions in larger towns. Through it all, the harsh winters and dry summers, the inevitable illnesses and accidents of frontier life, the constant work of maintaining their growing enterprise, Hannah and Griffin's bond only strengthened. The passion of their early marriage mellowed into a deep, abiding love built on shared struggles and triumphs. On the 10th anniversary of the night Griffin had first arrived at Hannah's door during William's illness, they sat together on the porch of their now substantial home. The children were asleep, the ranch quiet under a canopy of stars reminiscent of that first night they had spent together. "You ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Hannah asked, her head resting against Griffin's shoulder. "If you hadn't been passing by that night? If the storm hadn't forced you to seek shelter?" Griffin's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we've built together, and I can't imagine any other path." Hannah smiled, thinking of their 3 healthy children, their prosperous ranch, the community they had helped to build as Elko County grew and developed. "Nor can I. Though I sometimes wonder what finally made you stop that night. You must have passed dozens of isolated cabins in your travels." Griffin was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains silhouetted against the night sky. "I'd been riding all day through that storm," he finally said. "Was cold, tired, thinking I might have to make camp despite the weather. Then I saw the light from your window." He paused, his voice softening. "Something about it seemed to call to me specifically, like it was waiting just for me." Hannah turned her face up to his, still handsome despite the lines that a decade of sun and wind had etched more deeply. "Perhaps it was. Perhaps we were meant to find each other." Griffin smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "I'd like to think so. That some higher power knew a broken-down cowboy and a stubborn widow might just be able to heal each other, given the chance. And a very sick little boy who needed someone to stay with him through the night," Hannah added softly. Griffin nodded, his eyes warm with memory. "I meant what I said then, you know, about not letting go." "I know," Hannah replied, stretching up to press a kiss to his lips. "You've proven it every day since." As they sat together in the gentle darkness, the sounds of their sleeping children drifting through the open windows, Hannah felt a profound gratitude for the life they had created. From the desperate fear of that stormy night when William hovered between life and death, to this moment of quiet contentment, their journey had been one of unexpected blessings and hard-won happiness. Griffin's promise, "I won't let go," had become the foundation of their family, a testament to the healing power of love and the strength that comes from facing life's challenges together. What had begun as a chance encounter during a storm had grown into a love that would sustain them through whatever the future might bring. As the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Hannah looked up at her husband's face, the face that had become as familiar and necessary to her as her own heartbeat. In his eyes, she saw reflected the same certainty that filled her own heart. Whatever storms might come, they would weather them together, holding fast to each other and to the love that had saved them both.